In 1970, Ford released an engine that should have been a safe bet. It wasn't radical on paper, it didn't break displacement rules, and it didn't arrive with a warning label. Yet within months, the 351 Cleveland had done something no small block was supposed to do. It confused customers. It embarrassed bigger engines. And it quietly disrupted Ford's entire performance roadmap. This isn't the story of an engine that failed. It's the story of an engine that arrived at the wrong moment and refused to behave. By the late 1960s, Ford looked unstoppable. The Mustang dominated culture. The Boss 302 ruled Trans Am. The 428 Cobra Jet owned the drag strip. But under the hood, engineers saw limits approaching. The Windsor small block, in our first designed in 1961, had been stretched, bored, revised, and pushed hard. By the time it reached 351 cubic inches, airflow was becoming the bottleneck. More cam didn't fix it. More carb didn't fix it. The heads were the ceiling. Ford needed breathing room. The problem? Corporate didn't want another engine family. So engineers did what they've always done when budgets close and expectations stay high. They improvised. Built at Ford's Cleveland, Ohio plant, the new 351 shared a name with the Windsor, and almost nothing else. The Cleveland was designed from the heads down. Canted valves improved airflow geometry. Huge ports fed high RPM power. Closed combustion chambers supported serious compression. This wasn't an economy engine trying to be fast. It was a race-bred design wearing street clothes. On the dyno, it didn't scream. It pulled. On the street, it revved harder than expected. On the track, it punched above its weight. And suddenly, Ford had a problem it hadn't planned for. By 1971, Cleveland-powered cars were outperforming expectations, not just against other small blocks, but against heavier, more expensive big blocks. That mattered, because Ford's lineup wasn't just about engines. It was about order. Small blocks were meant to be efficient and affordable. Big blocks were meant to dominate. The Cleveland blurred that line. It delivered big block airflow without big block mass. And once customers noticed, the hierarchy started to crack. Just as the Cleveland found its stride, everything else shifted. Insurance companies targeted high-performance cars. Emissions regulations tightened. Compression ratios fell across the industry. The Cleveland, especially its early high-compression versions, had been designed for a high-octane world that was disappearing. Ford faced a choice: spend money adapting a specialized performance engine, or lean into platforms that were cheaper, simpler, and easier to standardize. The Windsor architecture won that argument, not because it was better, because it was easier to live with. Beginning in 1972, the Cleveland changed. Solid lifter cams disappeared. Closed chamber heads were replaced. Compression dropped. Timing softened. On paper, the engine survived. In reality, it was being reshaped into something safer. And quietly, Windsor-based engines began replacing it in more models. Engines that shared the name, but not the character. The Cleveland wasn't announced dead. It was simply allowed to fade. While the street versions were being softened, something else was happening on the track. Cleveland-based race engines were thriving. The cylinder head design worked very well at sustained high RPM. In NASCAR, where airflow and reliability mattered more than brochures, the Cleveland showed its true purpose. And once again, it raised an uncomfortable question. What happens when an engine outgrows the role it was designed for? Here's the twist most people miss. While the Cleveland faded in the US, it thrived elsewhere. Ford Australia embraced it. Different emissions rules, different market priorities, different attitude toward performance. In Falcons and GT cars, the Cleveland became a cornerstone. Raced, refined, and respected long after America moved on. An American engine survived because another country understood it better. By the late 1970s, Cleveland production in the US was effectively over. But the engine didn't disappear. It migrated into garages, into swap meets, into hybrid builds. Builders learned its strengths. They learned how to tame the ports. They learned what Ford never fully explored. And that's where the legend grew. Not in showrooms, but in hands that refused to let it go. What the Cleveland really proved: The 351 Cleveland wasn't too powerful. It was too specific. It was engineered for airflow and RPM in a decade that suddenly demanded compliance and cost control. Ford didn't erase it. They outgrew the conditions that allowed it to exist. But engines like this don't vanish. They wait. Here's the part of the story Ford never put in the brochure, because it didn't help them sell cars. The early Ford 351 Cleveland 4V heads flowed exceptionally well. At high RPM, they breathed like engines twice their size. At 6,000 RPM, they were alive. But at 2,000, those massive ports worked against themselves. Throttle response softened. Street manners suffered. The Cleveland wasn't broken. It was biased toward speed. Ford knew this. That's why the 2V version existed. Smaller ports, higher velocity, better drivability. It proved the platform could adapt. But by then, the world had already changed. Then came the Cobra Jet Cleveland. Reinforced, performance-focused, built to survive abuse. It showed the architecture could handle serious power. But it arrived too late, so Ford moved on. Builders didn't. In garages and race shops, something unexpected happened. Cleveland heads were bolted onto Windsor blocks, high RPM breathing, with a familiar bottom end. They called it the Clavor. Ford never built it. The aftermarket did. And that's when the Cleveland stopped being a factory option and became a builder's engine. The 351 Cleveland wasn't a mistake. It was a moment, a brief window where engineering ambitions slipped past corporate planning. And for a few short years, a small block reminded everyone that horsepower isn't just about size. It's about how well you let an engine breathe. And once you've heard a Cleveland at full song, you never forget it. If you could own one 351 Cleveland today, would you pick a 2V for drivability or a 4V for raw power? Let me know in the comments, like and subscribe for more rare engine stories.